Cool. Kia ora. All right. Sorry, everyone. Just admitting some people from the waiting room from jumping into this next session. So this is the second workshop on sustainability culture in your organisation with Mike Burrell, who I have made a co-host, so hopefully he can hear me say this as well.
I can. Well, thank you, Chloe. Can everybody hear me?
Kia ora, Mike.
Kia ora. Right, well, I'll just share my screen here, as we always say nowadays. Let me just get my piece going here. And while I do that, just maybe a bit of an introduction. My name is Mike Burrell. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Business Council. And for those of you who don't know what that is, you're about to find out. So let me just get that up here. Right. Hopefully you can see that now. Does that come up okay? Wonderful. So we're an industry organisation. I represent about 115 companies, and that's those companies you can see right now, ranging from the large to the small. We've got Fonterra at one end of the spectrum, right down to some of our more boutique businesses at the other end. We've been around for about 22 years in various forms, and like all organisations, we have a little strategy. And so what you can see here is a strategy that we launched last year with a focus on leadership, climate action and thriving people. And I can explain what that means a little later. We have a sister organisation called the Climate Leaders Coalition, and we share a vision with that organisation, which is a New Zealand where business, people and nature thrive together. The idea of sharing that vision is so that we can achieve more, particularly in the climate action space, which is something that I'm very passionate about, and so are my members, and I'll talk a little bit about that in more detail as we go through. I just want to acknowledge some of the work that I'm drawing on to put this together today. We do work with Colmar Brunton, and every year for the last 12 years, we've put together what's called the Better Futures Report, and the most recent one was released just over 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to draw on some lessons from that. I'm also drawing on some case studies from Sanford, the seafood company, Vector, the energy company, and Christchurch International Airport, just to bring to life how SDGs are built into those businesses and what that means from an organisational culture perspective. So what I want to do is start with why sustainability even matters to business. And you might think, well, surely it matters because businesses are comprised people, and therefore people care about the environment. That's true. But if you are a business owner, you also need to care about business. So why should you make SDGs or sustainability in general part of your business? So from here, I'm going to draw some lessons from some of the research that we've done over the last 12 months with Colmar Brunton, where we've asked a whole lot of New Zealanders what they think is important to them and why. And through that, we've seen a lot of the reasons for why businesses would want to be sustainable businesses. One of the first reasons is that it's something that is becoming more and more common in business. And so we're seeing right around the world, in New Zealand, this is true as well, everywhere from New Zealand through to Australia, through to the UK, on and on, that really sustainability has become quite mainstream. And so if you want to be competitive, you really have to go and catch up on that. You have to be part of that sustainability journey. And what we're seeing here in front of you on this slide is just how broad that goes. It goes everything from refill stations in supermarkets through to the way that the beauty industry is now promoting itself through diversity and inclusive branding, all the way through to businesses such as Mars and others who are focusing on the SDGs. So this isn't something off to the side. And I think when I moved from the government about 14 months ago and working in SDGs from an international development perspective and came across the business, I was really surprised just by how committed companies were to the SDGs. And we heard some speakers speak earlier about the fact that you don't really see this in government that much. In some departments you do, but not nearly like what you see in the corporate sector in New Zealand. So that was quite a surprise to me. So New Zealand companies have embraced this, and many of them, like EcoStore and others, have been doing it for decades. Others are a little bit later to the party, but more and more you're seeing people move from seeing sustainability as a brand proposition to being a business proposition. It's really the core part of their business, and we'll get to that in a minute, but it's about saying it's not something that you add on later. So it's not about greenwashing, because We've got a very informed consumer base now that can quickly check things out. If you're into greenwashing, you're going to be found out in 15 minutes. So you really have to embed sustainability in your business and be credible, or else it's actually going to undermine your business. We know that brands with strong brand purpose actually grow faster than those that don't. And on this slide here, you can see just how fast that growth is. If you have a weak proposition over a 12-year period, you grow at about 70%. If you have a strong brand purpose, you grow at 175%. Now, why is that? Well, part of the reason is the fact that it really motivates your people. More and more people are motivated by purpose. They don't just come to work for the money, they come to work because they want to gain meaning from that work. And if your business doesn't give them meaning, they will go somewhere else. If it does give them meaning, actually you get higher productivity. People are more energized, they bring more to it, which is why companies with strong brand purpose grow faster. What we've also seen is that companies outperform other companies where their social and environmental areas are, where they have high growth in those areas. And this is quite a surprise to us. If you look at this over that same 12-year period, you can see a gap of 47% between those companies that have very high focus on social environment and governance issues and those that don't. So again, just from a purely business perspective, it makes good business sense. So what's happening in New Zealand? Well, in New Zealand, despite a really challenging 2020, and we were very worried that because of COVID, what we'd see is the same drop that we saw back in 2007 after the financial crisis, with people actually more or less putting sustainability to one side. That hasn't happened in New Zealand. Now, there's no doubt that people have reprioritised, and what you see in this report is that people have really prioritised health and well-being and all of the things that you would expect them to focus on. In New Zealand, of course, housing really is front of mind for people, and affordability of housing. Youth suicide is another one that comes up very high. Things that you would expect people to focus on, particularly during a crisis. But even during that time, look at this graph. Okay, there's a little spike there in 2018 because of the awakening of public awareness around plastics. We knew that wouldn't last for very long, but that general trend continues to go up. You know, year on year, it's going up 2, 3, in this case 4%, and it's holding up, it's staying up there. So a third of people are committed to living more sustainably, and there's a range of ways in which we measure that. The brands are catching up. They recognise that if you want to be relevant, if you want to be recognised as a competitive brand in the 21st century, then you have to be genuinely sustainable. And so when people were asked, do you agree that each of the following businesses are leaders in any area of sustainability? Obviously, at the top of that, you have the companies which are known for their brand as being sustainable, so EcoStore and Fairtrade and others. That next group, that's changing. So there's the Teslas of this world, but look, Whittaker's is up there. Kathmandu and Meridian and Mercury are up there. You've got 65 to 74% of people who agree that they are sustainable businesses. And then down in that middle piece, over 50% of people think that Turners and Growers and BNZ and Genesis and Mitre 10, all of these companies are also sustainable. And what's very gratifying to us is that many of them are members of Sustainable Business Council, which is quite nice. So that's the reason why you might actually build this sort of sustainability into your business. But how do you go about embedding it in your business? So here what I'm going to do is, rather than just give you a lecture on all the different components, you didn't pay to come and see that, I'm going to take you through 3 examples, 3 companies that really are walking the talk when it comes to sustainability. They're not just putting a series of little decals beside in their strategy. They're really embedding these strategies into their business. They're changing the culture of their business to give effect to those strategies. And so I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about what that might look like. Because if you don't operationalize the SDGs, you're just putting symbols on a report. And in the early days of the SDGs, that's exactly what people were doing. What they did is they went through their strategy. They thought, oh, yeah, well, we're already doing those things there. We'll just align them with SDG 6 and SDG 8, etc. They didn't really go much further than that. It was a branding exercise. Since then, a lot's changed. And companies like Sanford and Vector have really led the way in working out how they align their business to those SDG commitments, and then how they motivate their people to feel alignment with those commitments as well. And key to this is leadership. So I'm going to start with Sanford. Sanford's a company I know a lot about. Before I worked in foreign affairs, I worked in the seafood industry as the CEO of Aquaculture New Zealand for 5 years. And Sanford's our largest seafood company. They're an internationally renowned company, but what you probably don't know is that they're internationally renowned for their sustainability credentials. Now, they've been doing that for a long time, but particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, they've really gone into another level. And you'll see this as an integrated report. For those of you who are interested in this kind of stuff, you'll know that integrated reports mean that you don't just report on your financial performance, you report holistically. And you look at all elements of your business, and you're reporting on the social indicators, environmental indicators, as well as business indicators. And companies like Sanford have been doing this for a number of years now. And they're getting pretty sophisticated about it. So they really deeply embed this stuff into their report. It's not like it's a once over lightly. If you go in, you can go online and look at this report. You can see it in quite a lot of detail. And you'll see at the heart of this for them is care, passion, and integrity. So they're putting a set of values at the heart of it. And then around it, you see they've got a series of things that they're talking to here: supporting strong communities and partnerships, building sustainable seafood business, ensuring healthy oceans. And within each of those, they've got the SDGs that relate to them. But then what they do is they make sure that the metrics that they're measuring actually align with those SDG metrics as well. So they are measuring this stuff. Now, as a person who's just spent 8 years in the public service, I'm really encouraged by this, because this is not what you're seeing in the public service. You're not really seeing the same degree of measurement. To be fair, there are a number of departments that are doing precisely this, but there are a lot that are not. So when I see a company like Sanford's doing this, I think, well, it can be done. You can actually align your business with these outcomes. Now, to do that, of course, as anyone has done this sort of stuff, you obviously do stakeholder engagement, and you have a materiality process, which basically ranks the importance of these various things, and then you put that into your strategy. Now, companies like Sanford do that regularly. So they're doing that every 2 years. They're refreshing it. They recognize that these things change, and they're aligning that. Now, the other reason they do that is because it gets buy-in from their stakeholders. Now, just to give a little story, as I say, I've known Sanford for a long time. When I went and visited Sanford after sort of 8-10 years of not seeing them, and I went into their head office, I barely recognized it. It had completely changed. And the reason it had changed is the culture had changed. And I spoke to their CEO and said, well, what is it about why can I feel a different vibe in this place? And the reason for it is that people are bought into that holistic view of what Sanford's about. They're really passionate about what their product is, but they're also passionate about what they're doing in terms of the SDGs. They've got the SDGs all through the office. People talk about particular ones that they want to focus on. They're really heavily bought into this. The key to it, I'm going to be repeating this, is leadership. That leadership came from the CEO. It comes from the CEO, comes from the executive group around that CEO, comes from the board as well. And then that comes all the way up through the organisation by individual members of that team seeing themselves in the strategy and being able to identify where they fit into the shared vision. Yeah? So they've identified a set of 8 global goals that are relevant to them, which are those ones there. And then they've drilled that down and embedded that in their strategy. So that's Sanford. Vector have done a similar thing. They've also got an integrated report. And what they've also done is they've aligned their goals with the global goals. So they've said, well, goal 7 for them, affordable and clean energy. That also aligns to some of those other goals there as well, the subordinate ones around 17, 13, and 9. And then they've built their strategy around that particular goal there. So that's obviously an important one for them. Sustainable cities and communities is vital to Vector. And in fact, they see that as a really critical part of the transformation story in New Zealand, something that they believe is not done well enough, and that they have an active role there. And again, you can see this is their people really, really engaging their staff, their teams, in this process. It's not some kind of little book that sits on a shelf. They've developed it with their people, with their teams, and then also that projects out to their customers. So they're really living the strategy. And the same is true with climate action. And I know the CEO of Vector very well, passionate about just how important climate action to New Zealand is. Really pushes us on what we need to be doing in that area. And you see it with the way in which they really focus the attention, their business outcomes on how they can achieve that. And then maybe a surprising one, Christchurch Airport. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, would Christchurch Airport be on my my list of companies that were focused on sustainability? I probably would have thought, oh, well, maybe a little on the margin. No, this is a leading company in New Zealand on this. So their CEO is really driving some very significant change. One of only 2 companies in the world to receive the highest award for sustainability for airports. Only one of 2 in the world. And the way that they're doing that is through really embedding sustainability in their objectives and in their business planning. And to the point where some of the targets that they're setting for themselves are incredible stretch targets. And you can see just how some of these are coming up here. 46% of waste recycled, down from, so it's actually slightly down from before, but very, very high number, yeah. Look at those tons of decrease in the amount of waste sent to landfills. Those sorts of numbers, those metrics are really driving them. But more importantly, what's happening with their leadership is they're recognising the importance of taking this beyond just their scope 1 emissions and beginning to look at scope 2 and beyond. And so, of course, for them, the most important piece is that aeroplane that's in that picture right there. And so this is a company that's really pushing us as the Sustainable Business Council and also the Climate Leaders Coalition to say, if we don't come up with sustainable aviation fuels, if we are not driving around sustainable aviation fuels, then here we are as a little country at the bottom of the world flying these large air miles. That's not good enough. We have to be at the front of pushing for that sustainability. And so I've been very impressed by the work that they, Andy, in New Zealand and others have done to say, yes, it's nice to have keep cups. Yes, it's nice to be able to deal with the ground-based stuff. But if you're not dealing with the air-based stuff, then you're missing the elephant in the room. And they're not afraid to do that, which is really, again, comes back to leadership, back to bravery as well. So what does this culture of sustainability look like? And at Christchurch Airport's a good place to start. So the critical part is the leadership piece. What happened in the past was you tended to have sustainability professionals leading the charge on this. Now, that's fantastic. But of course, it will only get you so far, because very often they're mid-ranking staff members. They have some access, but not great access to the executive, and they very often don't have access to the board at all. So what that means is that they don't influence the business decisions. What we've been focusing on over the last 6 years is the board and executive level, getting that vertical alignment between the board, the CEO and their team, and then the sustainability professionals themselves. The sustainability professionals love that because it means that they've got a channel through to affect change at the highest level. What that then allows is for the resources to be released, for those to go in and allow staff to be able to start to align their work to the business strategy. If you don't have that, and this is critical, if you don't have that, then sustainability becomes something just off to the side. You can see here, that's not just a little picky for here. If you go into the airport, these things are everywhere to the point where it looks a little bit like a cult. You know, it's, and why is that? It's because they're really taking this stuff seriously. And you see it embedded through their strategy, but you also see it in the training that they do and the support that they provide to their staff and the leadership programs that they provide. So they're winding it all through that culture. And what this is doing is it's meaning that their engagement results are increasing year on year because staff can see what their purpose is and they feel like they're doing something that's greater than just their job. And it's fantastic for productivity. They get a much higher rate of staff retention, but they also get much greater productivity out of those staff. So it's good business, yeah. So just a few quick conclusions here, because I want to leave a lot of time for conversation, and Chloe's going to give me the look in a second. You've got to move beyond mapping. Mapping is great, but it doesn't really get the change that you need. It's just the start. You've got to translate those global goals into something tangible that makes sense to your business. The goals aren't mutually exclusive. Often they're interconnected, and you will be surprised by which goals appeal to which staff members. Identifying and getting those targets that are relevant and measurable is really important. And indicators don't need to be exhaustive, and they may not even align with business imperatives. That's okay, as long as they align with the SDGs, and again, people can see meaning in them, then they're useful. There's a need to be able to compare year-on-year performance against targets and reconcile those with established KPIs, because if you can't do that, then obviously your board's going to look at this a bit askance and say, well, how does this actually impact our performance? I'm going to leave some of those other ones there, but that important piece there about making the SDGs meaningful to staff and the importance of leadership at the board and executive level is critical. So the value of the goals is it provides the shared understanding of risks, opportunities, and ambition. I really, really wish that the public sector could see this as much as the private sector see. This is a fantastic framework for organising yourself around a shared understanding of risk, opportunity, and ambition. It provides that common language for sustainability across all business and government and civil society, which is great if you are a business trying to reach communities. And it enables alignment with national priorities and a global agenda. So then it's that thing of higher purpose beyond just what you're doing now. The alignment to business is really critical, and so adopting a targeted approach is really important. Using the value chain to find your context is important. The materiality element, of course, is important to us. Embedding SDGs in strategy helps you to map out your future aspirations. But most important of all is if you don't have that partnership and collaboration to deliver this, then you're not going to get the scale and the pace that you require to make it happen. Chloe, that's me. What I thought I would do now is to maybe just open up for 5 minutes of Q&A, and then we're going to go into some workshops. Is that right, Chloe? Yep, I think I got a thumbs up. Cool. So happy to take any questions.
Cool. People are welcome to ask questions into the chat, and Mike, do you want to pull out some questions you can see? Or people who want to direct them to Mike directly.
Let me just get my chat going here.
I can read one out if that's helpful.
That'd be great. I'm just trying to get my chat going.
Yeah, no problem. Cool. So I've got one here from Jasmine asking, any tips for those of us trying to influence board and exec level from our slightly lower down? How do we maximize our opportunities to influence when those opportunities arise?
Good question, really good question. So I suppose two ways. One is be prepared. So be prepared for those opportunities when they emerge, and speak to somebody in another organisation, maybe a like organisation or a like company or whatever, and say that is already doing it, and ask them how they did it. One of the reasons people belong to organisations like SBC, frankly, is to learn from each other. You know, and so that happens at the board level, it happens at the professional level. So being prepared is one. The other is think about ways in which you can impact change higher up through peer-to-peer learning. There's nothing like that inbuilt competition that happens when a CEO meets another CEO, and that CEO is doing something better than they are. There's an inbuilt need for competition there, and they will emulate that other CEO. If they see what they're doing, they will try and do it themselves. The same goes for boards. The same is certainly true of executives. So those are two little tips there.
Got it. I think just keeping an eye on time, Mike, we probably should pop into those breakout rooms, and then there will be some space again at the end for some Q&A that potentially come out of those rooms.
Fantastic. So the question for the breakout sessions is, how do you or how could you embed sustainability in your organisation's culture?
All right, stay tuned, everyone. I'm going to pop you into some breakout rooms.
So Chloe, I think what I'm meant to be doing now is talking to people and saying, you were meant to have one person who was going to report back, which was the bit that I failed to mention earlier. So what I'd like to do is, I think there were 7 or 8 groups, something like that. So I thought I might just go from group, I think I might randomise it. I might just start with group 4, if people can remember what group they were in. Or maybe a better way to do it would be, how about each group put up their hand and we'll just pick the reporters. So I'm going to start with Matt. Were you a reporter?
It may not be.
Matt, Thomas, were you? No, Thomas wasn't. How about somebody who was a reporter puts up their hand? He's going to report back. No one's going to report back. Tony, how about you start?
Well, we had a conversation about how we engage our communities, because we had 2 councils, and it was a bit of a struggle to sort of work out how best to reach new audiences. That was our key challenge. So thinking about because often we have events and we have engagement, and it's always the same faces turning up time and time again. So how do we reach a wider range of people with the sort of sustainability culture and messages we want to get out? So that was a conversation we were having.
Fantastic. So just on that one, Tony, I mean, one of the things we've talked a lot about within the Sustainable Business Council is how you build out from your constituency. And what we've found is that very often it's about finding what people's drivers are. And so whether you do that through a materiality assessment or whether you do it just by mapping it out in your own mind and working out, well, why would a person be interested in sustainability? For example, in our membership, it's about a 50-50 split between those who are driven by social sustainability and those who are driven by environmental sustainability. And it sort of splits out that way. And so if you can find something that appeals to them, often you can build that group and make it larger, often by even not using the term sustainability. Very often people will talk about, well, of course I care about litter because I like tidiness. It's not about it's not about the environment. I like it to be tidy. Well, the outcome is the same. I think building that constituency that's part of the challenge, isn't it, with sustainability, getting beyond the usual suspects.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's a really good observation. We also talked about, I think, the fact that often sustainability in councils is pushed to the side a wee bit. I know it's part of what they, the outcomes, community outcomes is core to what they do, but the point you made really early on was if you don't have that alignment with managers and CEOs and so on, actually it's a real struggle to drive sustainability in the organisation. So I'm aware that many organisations are like that.
Absolutely. And I think that's very true of councils, but to be fair, I think it's true of a lot of organisations. Very useful. Thank you, Tony.
Cool. Right. Sorry, Mike. Kia ora. Sorry to speak over you. Just conscious of time again. If I could suggest that maybe if people have any comments or feedback from that breakout, if they could pop it into the chat function, which will be saved following this workshop, because we've got maybe 3-4 minutes that I think it would be really cool to get some Q&A happening.
Right.
If that feels
I'll hand over to you, Chloe.
So I did just see, I can't view the little image at the moment, but I think Kath Wallace had your hand up raised before at the beginning of the the workshop. So Kath, if you would like to unmute, perhaps you could raise your question.
Okay, thank you. I've been, well, I should say I'm the co-chair of the Environment and Conservation Organisations and have done a great deal of work on marine and fisheries, but also all sorts of other environmental policy and planning and economics. But I was just thinking about the various things, Greg Burrell, that you were saying about Sanford. And that is really not consistent with what we see in practice. As we know, they've just been prosecuted for fishing inside a protected areas, not once, but many times. And they have been prosecuted, but their 20 million boat, though forfeit, in fact, they get back for a forfeit fee of about 70 grand or so. And you also have in your ranks, plenty of really good groups, and Kogo, for instance, is a great group, but I'm horrified to see that they're connected with Westpac, which has always stood behind and fostered mining, including funding Bathurst mining on conservation land with very rare snail habitat. So if you have a look in the chat, you'll see there's a bit of my skepticism and some of the knowledge I have kind of fact checking what you were saying. And you yourself said, well, people can't get away with things, but you did right. And those genuinely sustainable businesses will get smeared by the bad behaviour of some of the others. And I think you should be a little careful as to who you let in your ranks.
Thanks, Kath. So I think you and I would probably have a bit of a disagreement over this. I suppose my view would be that if you don't engage with the big end of town, you don't get big change. And all it takes is for some of these companies to do the right thing, and suddenly you see massive change. And an illustration that was given to me a while ago was the example of a company like Unilever making a pledge to reduce its packaging by 40% within 2 years, which it then went and did, which was equivalent to the next 8 companies doing the same thing. And if you went down to SMEs, it was equivalent to about 30,000 SMEs doing that. So my view is that you really do need to engage with corporate New Zealand and global corporates as well, if you're really going to see that impact. I think it's really important to hold them to account, as you do, and you do very well, because they do need to be held to account and they do need to change. But it's also important for the leaders within those companies to see the value of them engaging and the value of them being truly sustainable businesses, because if they retreat from that, then they aren't going to change. And what I would say about many of the companies that you've just listed is that they do publish all of this material. They do respond to that feedback that they get, and they are really trying to be better businesses. And we're seeing...
And Sanford's is still bottom trawling, all the lovely words, but they're still bottom trawling. And there's a paper that's just come out a few days ago from Nature showing that bottom trawling releases as much greenhouse gases as the aviation industry.
I saw that paper.
Now, you know, we want to see real change, not just nice stuff printed on the page or the website. And you know, I've been engaging with these pricks for years. They're oligarchs, and they are extremely powerful. Telly's is a good deal worse than Sanford's for sure. But they are just not going. I mean, the more you greenwash them, the happier they'll be.
Kath, I have to disagree with you. I mean, what we're trying to do is work with companies who really want to change. And I think that the points that you're making are valid points. But if you merely, and I think we've all got roles to play here, and I think critique is fine. But my approach is to work with these companies and to really engage with their leadership to genuinely change. Now, that's going to take time, but some of them are changing very quickly. And some of those ones that I mentioned today are really making some big efforts to do that. So I'd have to, disagree with some of your statements just now. Thank you, though.
Cool. Kia ora room. This has been an amazing discussion, and I hate to be the person that has to wrap it up, what feels to be early, but we are due to head back into the main room for the remainder of the hui. But perhaps if people could put their questions into the chat, and that chat can be saved, and we can continue this mahi and this conversation at another time. And yes, thank you so much, Mark, for your time. And for
quite okay, Chloe. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you everyone for attending.
Cool. Kia ora. I'll be putting the link back into the main room into the chat, so just keep an eye out. Cool.
Great. Thanks very much.
All right, kia ora everyone. Final message, pop back into the main room and we'll see you there real soon. Kia ora.